Good evening, everyone. Once again, my name is Karen Carabani, Chair. I would like to get started by reminding everyone that we are in a live and recorded session. So please keep all your comments and questions to the designated time. And when you do speak, please remember to state your name for those listening online. And if you need to use the restroom, you can go out the doors to the left for the people who are participating in person. With that, I'd like to get started. Our first order of business is, unfortunately, there is no representative to speak on the Bell Road portion of the agenda. So I would request a motion to remove that from tonight's agenda. If I could please get a motion. Is there a second? Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Is there anyone opposed? Our second order of business will be now to approve the amended agenda. If I can get a motion to do that. So moved. Is there a second? Second. All in favor, say aye. Is there anyone opposed? Good, thank you. And then lastly, I would like to make a motion to approve the meeting notes from.
Ask for a motion.
I'm requesting a motion to approve the meeting notes for the last meeting.
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, we're getting started. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So we are still waiting on one of our speakers. I've got a few slides to run through, and then Spencer, did you want to I can go first or? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so for tonight, our topic is housing. Just to sort of run through the flow of the meeting for this evening is we'd like to introduce you to the planning and policy as it relates to housing. Some general terms that we use here in the planning world. We often hear about affordable housing, workforce housing, maybe some other types of housing. So tonight's meeting is intended to really just get us on that same page, understand what some of the differences are, what those terms mean, what the market forces are that drive some of this and the funding behind some of that, and the development processes of how market rate housing gets built as opposed to maybe, again, your affordable housing types. So we'll get into that. And I do want to start, like I said, is with just a brief overview of the development review process. So next slide. And Aaron, feel free to join us up here. Yeah. So as projects get built, it really starts with the property owner. This is a private market. The county doesn't tell a private property owner when to develop their property. We do identify certain guardrails or rules of how that property is developed. But ultimately it starts with that willing property owner that has ultimately understood or looked into the research of what demand is out there for various markets. So often we hear about projects, let's say, for example, townhome projects that go up and people say, well, who's going to buy that $400,000 townhome in that community? Well, market research has been done and identified that there is indeed a market for that. Conversely, we sometimes hear about on the commercial side, we want a Trader Joe's. Everybody wants a Trader Joe's, but again, that same type of market research has been researched, and it isn't feasible in that area at that time. So again, identifying willing property owners who have identified that market demand, and then once a property owner wants to move forward with the project, working with the government and identifying what, again, those rules are. And I've got a slide here and a couple that identify where you find out what you can build on your property, and again, certain guidelines of how that actually looks. So then again, working with a developer to get that project out of the ground, going through submitting an application, whether it's a sketch plan, or a preliminary plan, and then working through that entitlement process and ultimately getting to, the permit phase. And again, another key component of this is the lending community. And we'll hear from our speakers that in certain cases, there are a lot of differences between getting a project out of the ground for market rate projects versus affordable housing projects. Next slide. So again, these are the two main sections of the county code where you would find what you can do with your property, those being the uses, whether it's permitted by right, whether you have to meet a certain set of conditions, or whether through a special exception, you have to meet a certain set of conditions as well as get approval from an administrative hearing officer. It also identifies sort of that intensity of what you can build on your property, how many housing units per acre. And again, given the actual size of that lot, how much you can build. Building height, how far back that building is from the front of the street, the side properties, the rear properties, as well as parking requirements. All that's found in Article 18. The subdivision and development chapter or Article 17, that identifies the review process where you go through the testing. We talked about school testing at the previous meeting, and really what APF, adequate public facilities, is really just identifying or ensuring that there is capacity for these certain items when that project is built. So making sure that there's school capacity, that the roads can still function to a certain level after that project is built, and meeting stormwater requirements, and ensuring that there's sewer and water capacity as well. It also identifies making sure that you're protecting the streams or wetlands or other environmental resources on the property, as well as then any potential historic resources. So there's, again, the guidelines of when a project comes out of the ground, what that would actually look like and what it actually is. So again, like I said, there are two tracks you can essentially take if you have a piece of property and you need to subdivide it. Say again, as if you're doing a set of townhomes or single family homes and you have one lot, you're going to need to subdivide that property into the various lots so that each one of those future property owners owns their own lot. And then the route number 2 in blue is the site development, and that's more of an example of a multifamily project where you don't need to subdivide the property, and it is just one lot, and you can build your apartment building up from there. So again, you need to meet. The first phase is going through sketch plan or preliminary plan, depending upon which track you're on. Once you get approval, going through final and site development plan, and then once you do get approvals for that, you're moving on to your permitting phase. In certain situations, there are community meetings. This is really if you're asking for environmental modifications, or if your project abuts a residentially zoned property that has a building on it, or in certain cases, if it's abutting, say, an industrial property as well, just to ensure that the public is aware of this development and can understand what type of impact may result from it. Next slide. So again, I just want to emphasize that for developing affordable housing, which our speakers will talk about, that there are certain other complexities especially for the financing process, that impact the timing and sequencing of sketch plan, final plan, preliminary plan, site development plan. But I'll leave it up to them to talk about then how that figures in and what some of those constraints are and the complexity of that. Next slide. So with that, I'll hand it over to our speakers. They'll do sort of a panel presentation, share some of some examples of affordable housing, go over some of these terms, talk about some of the opportunities and constraints of affordable housing here in the county and especially in Region 1. So I'll pass it over to Erin Karpowitz.
Great, thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Erin Karpowitz. I'm the CEO for Arundel Community Development Services, and we're Anne Arundel County's nonprofit housing and community development agency. We're not the public housing authority that owns the public housing in the county or administers the housing choice voucher program, but we do a lot of the other county government functions related to housing. We manage a lot of government funding like HUD funds, and also county funds that have been designated specifically to support housing and community development projects and programs. If you could, are you doing the,
I'm sorry, Erica in the back
okay,
is running the
if
slide.
you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. Actually, this must have gotten mixed. I didn't mix it up the last time, but anyway, could you go to the, I'm gonna skip around. There we go. Okay, so I want to just kind of set the stage for what is affordable housing, because that's one of our main mission points. We do a lot of community development as well. We administer a lot of grants. And I'm sharing that with this group, especially because of the region that you're in. We've done a lot of grants into community organizations that work in the Brooklyn Park area. We partnered with the Greater Baybrook Alliance. I see some of you, I know some of you from our work with them. We provide grant funding to the Chesapeake Art Center. So that's one hat we wear as grant administrators on behalf of the county. But we also do a lot to support affordable housing opportunities. And so that's why I want to just kind of set the stage about what is affordable housing. A lot of people think of affordable housing as, you know, public housing, but it actually runs the gamut. There's a lot of different types of affordable housing. Affordable housing really means housing that's affordable to whatever income level you're talking about. If a household makes $200,000 a year, they still have a budget and they still have to have a housing situation that meets their budget. If you're making $50,000 a year, you have a housing budget and you have to, and it's just harder to meet that budget when you're making lower income. Typically, when we're talking about it, we want to help people so that they're not paying more than 30-35% of their income on housing. So when you're talking about people at the lower income range, the gap between, you know, what they need to pay and what's available on the market gets a lot wider. But it's kind of on a continuum. We've got a lot of low and moderate income people that need affordable housing. And when you're looking at home ownership, there are a lot of moderate income households in the county that can't afford home ownership opportunities. So there are a lot of different programs and policies in the county that we are involved in trying to support or further along to ensure that there are housing opportunities for a wide variety of income levels. But again, you know, the most difficulty is when we're talking about people at the lower income. And really, we're talking about a lot of our workforce. When we go and talk to employers, there's a lot of you know, consternation and concern because they can't attract the workers that they need because it's really hard for them to find affordable units. We hear that from people in the education industry. You know, we had a shortage for bus drivers and teachers' aides. It's especially true too in the service industry, construction industry. A lot of our essential workers who are making at the lower income levels, it's really hard for them to find rental housing that's affordable. And then even more so difficult to find homeownership opportunities. So when we're talking about affordable housing that is subsidized by some of the programs that I administer and that my colleagues here work with in order to develop the units they're talking about, we're typically talking about people who are making 60% of the area median income, which is around $73,000 a year for a family of four. So it's, you know, it's just difficult for those folks to find units that are at the right price point. So if you could just flip back one slide, this is just to give you a sense of the need overall in the county. In the county, no matter what your income level is, 45% of all renters in the county are paying more than 45% of their income. More than 30% of their income for rent and housing cost. And when you look at, again, the lower income, that problem is even more severe. About 19% of all renters, regardless of their income level, are paying more than 50% of their income for housing costs. So that means that they're severely rent burdened, according to a lot of industry standards. Also, just to give you an idea, in the last 3 years during the pandemic, well, really from 2019 to 2022, we did a study in 2019 and looked at the housing needs And then we updated it in 2022. The average, rent price was going, I'm sorry, I think it's the median. Is it the median? Yeah. Rental prices have risen dramatically. So it went from about $1,500 in 2019 to about $1,900 in 2022. So that was like an annualized increase of about 5.7%, I believe. And the situation on the home ownership is really hard too. It's really difficult to find affordable units. We know that the median home price, the sale price went up when it's looking at 2017, between 2017 and 2022, it went up about 35%. Meanwhile, incomes went up just about 17%. So income, even though we've seen an increase in incomes with inflation, it hasn't kept pace with the rate of housing. So that just means, you know, as people are cost burdened or can't find housing that's affordable to them, they're just paying more and more for their housing. That means less for groceries, which have also gone up. So it can be a challenge. If you want to go to the next slide, thank you. This is just a slide, and I'll let my colleagues talk a little bit more about this. You know, when we're talking about creating rental units that are affordable for people who are making about that 60% of area median income and below, again, that's about $73,000 for a family of 4. They can't afford what it really costs to produce the housing and run the housing in a sustainable way, right? We don't want to have affordable rental units and not have them be well managed or well run. That costs money. It costs money to develop. And so there needs to be some kind of subsidy. What we do is we provide some loan funds, low interest loan funds, cheaper financing than you. And developers are able to leverage that with some resources from the state. And that means their debt service payments are less. Then they can also afford to charge less to the renters. So that's a really important tool that we have in our toolbox to be able to offer those that financing to developers so that they can create those units. Next slide. And also, if you look at this slide up closely, if you get this information, the one I just showed, it has an interest rate of like 3.9%, and the assumptions that's way outdated. So we all know that's outdated. So, but it's still a good illustration. This is just an example of a community that we helped fund. And it was developed down the road in the Glen Burnie area. It's Oakwood Family Homes. They're single family homes, but they are rental units. They're a rent to own property. And so the tenants, after they go through, home ownership counseling, they do have the opportunity to purchase those homes. You can come on in. There's some seats back here.
I wasn't sure if it was closed, so now it's like, oh, so.
Yeah, no, come on in. Next slide. This is another one. This is a multi-family building, and it is Marlene Meadows, and this is for seniors. It's about 36 units. So it's a great facility. And these are just to give you an example. These are beautiful, well-run facilities. The other example I wanted to just point out is right next door to us, Woodfall Greens. That's actually these units are serving people at 60% of area median income. That property did not get any loan financing. It's serving mostly market rate, but the incomes are restricted to 120% of area median income. So that's a household making, gosh, for a family of 4, that would be like $40,000 or more. So that's more of the moderate range. They did not get any loan subsidies, but that is restricted because they took advantage of one of the county's tools that they have in the toolbox to waive impact fees because it was developed by a nonprofit housing developer. Next slide, please. And then finally, this is one of our scattered site rental units. My agency acts as a developer on smaller projects. So we actually purchase properties and rehabilitate them and rent them out to eligible renters. And this is something we're also re-exploring. We've explored it in the past, but exploring doing this for home ownership units too, where we would go and acquire the units, rehab them and sell them to income eligible home buyers who might have difficulty buying a home on the market because of because of the subsidies, or maybe they could buy one of these units, but it would be severely dilapidated and have other issues. So this is right over in the Brooklyn Heights in Arundel Village area. Some of you have driven through that. You might notice, our units have the distinctive porch and the cornice and, very distinctive features. I think they look really nice. And that may be something that we look to do on the homeownership side. Next slide, please. This is just the before and after. You can go to the next one. So we do provide homeownership counseling. It's free for any county resident, regardless of your income. And then potential home buyers who've gone through that program are eligible to purchase a home and utilize our mortgage assistance program if they meet the income eligibility requirements. So they have to make below 100% of area median income. I believe is about 118,000 for a family of 4. Don't quote me on these numbers. I'm going from memory. But that program provides up to $50,000 in down payment and closing cost assistance for those limited income buyers. And it's a way that, we're trying to encourage, more people in underserved communities that haven't traditionally had access to down payment funds, be able to afford the dream of home ownership. But on the flip side, one of the issues is these folks can't find housing. We provide that it's up to 50,000 depending on what the need is. And if you're looking for, if you're getting that funding, you're going to be paying zero payments at 0% deferred interest. So there are no payments on that 50,000. It would be a lien put on the property. So it's a really good deal. And we've only had, I would say, 10 households purchase homes in the last, 9 months. So, and we have funding. So it's people are really having a hard time finding units. And if they are finding units, it might be a unit that needs a lot of work or has lead or any other housing quality issues. So there is a need for more supply and there's a need for redevelopment. I think, is that it? Oh, so yeah, right. So solutions to increase supply. I already talked about one of them, which is to provide low interest loans to developers who develop affordable housing. And then in return, they have to restrict the incomes. We have a lot of sources of funding for that. The county's been really great about creating an affordable housing trust fund lately. And we also have some other tools that we use. I mentioned waiving impact fees. We can also waive water and sewer connection fees for the developers. And we can also provide some operating subsidies in the form of a pilot or payment in lieu of taxes. That's basically a discount on their county property taxes. And those are some of the funding sources to help spur supply. And also we can provide the funding. I mentioned the mortgage assistance program, which is the down payment and closing cost assistance. That's on the demand side, obviously. And then there's some land use tools that we can utilize. So we have a workforce housing zoning provision in the county code that was revamped recently. And that really is a critical tool. And I'll let Jessica talk about that a little bit more. And some other things, ADUs, accessory dwelling units, you're allowed to build a small unit on your property now that doesn't have to be attached to your house. So if you have, maybe an older parent who is living on a fixed income and they need a place to live, or if you want to create a small, rental unit, that is allowed under the code. No short-term rentals. And then the other thing, a lot of different groups or jurisdictions have explored moderately priced dwelling unit programs, which I like to think of as an inclusionary housing policy. That really allows the county to be able to, require developers when they're developing properties and subdivisions, require them to make a small percentage of those units affordable to people who are of moderate income and ensure that those affordable units are scattered throughout the county so that all the affordable housing doesn't end up in one area. And that was a policy that was actually just recently debated at the county council. And it was ultimately defeated, but there could be a resurgence of that sometime. And that's, I think, it. Is that my last slide? Yes, okay. That's all I have. I'll let you all take it over from there.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jessica Zuniga. I'm from Foundation Development, and I'm gonna start off our developer panel. Next slide, please, Erica. Thank you. So I thought this was really interesting, and Aaron covered a little bit of it, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I did a presentation to another planning group probably about a year and a half ago to talk about the barriers to affordable housing. And my list was lack of high density zoning. And Aaron mentioned that we now have a codified conditional use for workforce housing, which allows you to take the R22 zoning, which is a residential 22 unit per acre zoning, to various classifications that are not necessarily high density residential zoning. So there's actually 11 zoning districts in the county that if they meet certain objective criteria, like certain classifications of roads, are able to now become essentially high density zoned properties, provided that the units do have an affordability component, whether it be rental or affordable. So that was sort of a big check, because the biggest complaint in the county is that there is there's very little high density ground that is not built on at this point. So that was a big piece of that. And there's also some parking relief. The county has a high parking code, and so there's some parking relief along with that too, done recently. So high cost, the county, although it might be in the Baltimore MSA, it really kind of feels like a DC county with the cost of living here. And so also residential land, particularly high density land, is incredibly expensive. So the county has tried to offset a little bit of that by waiving portions of the sewer and water connection fees. They're offering a path for payment in lieu of taxes now for affordable communities. And also Aaron mentioned a lot of the loan programs, and there's a new loan program for us. And then the school APFO mitigation, which was, sort of a development stopper for everyone. Now there is mitigation, and there is essentially an exemption for affordable housing or workforce housing. So those are, three big things that I think the county has really worked hard to try to tackle. Next slide, please, Erica. So, but development is still development, right? And there's a lot of other tests that affordable housing, just like any other development, still has to pass all of those tests. And one of the things about affordable housing, again, because the county is a desirable area, the land is expensive here. We are usually not getting the best properties, right? They usually have problems. I like to call them 3+ problems, right? So they might have severe environmental conditions. They might have a lot of topography. They could have water features, so there's just many things that increase the cost of development when you have very challenging land. And so, I think one of the examples I would use is the forest conservation bill that was passed. I think it's probably about 2 years ago. And, it really increased the forestation requirements, which, kind of down zones land. So now you have less density. The county's code, I think there are a lot of opportunities in this area. I think there's at least one overlay district. There might be two, which creates some flexibility. So particularly with affordable housing, again, because we're getting usually redevelopment sites or very unique sites, having some flexibility in the code to, get modifications and not go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, for example, or, code that does provide some sort of outlet for redevelopment as opposed to just greenfield suburban development, I think is really important when we talk about affordable housing. And I think some of the MXD zones or another overlay type district would be a way to create some of that flexibility. And then, just regulations and process alignment. And I'm going to let Andrew talk a lot about just our financing and how that lines up. But, subdivision requirements, I think when you have age restricted and general occupancy together, they have to be on separate parcels. So right now in our financing structures, we're actually incentivized to create 2 standalone communities on the same site, But if one is age restricted and one is general occupancy in the county, we must then subdivide the site, which creates a whole nother chain of, you have two separate entrances, you have two separate sets of facilities for everything, and so it just increases the cost of development.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Andrew Hansen. I'm with Homes for America. We're a nonprofit based in Annapolis. And I think my chance was to talk briefly about sort of some of the challenges of trying to produce affordable housing. Erica, if you want to go to the next slide. So from a timing perspective, affordable housing is just like other development. The difference is how it's financed and the sort of the effective rents or prices that are being achieved. So the complication is on top of all the other processes that Mark talked about, where you're going through the review and approval process where many different agencies, from a developer's perspective, we feel like every single agency, but many agencies provide a review and comment on it. In addition to that process, you're also working with trying to secure financing. And really the way that you or most folks are able to provide affordable housing is they're going and trying to find financing and resources that allow you to pass along lower costs to the end user. So there's a resource that's a federal resource that's administered at the state level. There's the tax credit, low income housing tax credit. And the State Housing Agency, Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, or DHCD, they administer that resource. There's a competitive process. Typically, it's an annual process where everyone sort of reads the guidelines and tries to compete in this competitive process to get the highest score. So you've got one round typically for that every year. And you've got a few other resources that are administered, but you're trying to basically find a site. Typically, it's a tough site, as Jessica said. Have that site under control, work on your design and the process to have it reviewed and approved by the county and sometimes the state, if you have state highway, if you have wetland, if you have, other pieces of the puzzle. And then on top of that, you're also working on your financing. So, what used to take maybe 12 months way back in the day now takes probably more like 24 months, because realistically, the county has a lot of projects. Banks that we're working with and the Maryland DHCD, they have a lot of projects. So plus there's also a limit of those resources. What we've seen is Maryland DHCD had a budget for some of the loan programs that was a lot bigger in the past few years, partially because of the COVID and other funding. But this past year, that their budget was cut significantly. So there's also just a backlog of projects that are feasible and would like to move forward, but there's not always those resources available. So we've got some real struggles with sort of coupling the timing with the financing complications. Thankfully, from an approval process, we're fortunate. Anne Arundel County certainly doesn't make it even more challenging. There's certainly some jurisdictions that make it a real struggle to get approvals and make it, I'll say, onerous. So we are thankful for that. We're thankful for the new programs that have been passed and the programs that have been available in the past as well. I think after this, we were just going to share some examples of a few projects that have been developed. I think these sort of complement the ones that Aaron already shared, but this is a 48-unit community that was built in Odenton. I think it's important to point out that just in looking at this picture, albeit it may not be a great picture, but this was built to really show pride of this may be affordable housing, but it was well built with nice materials. You're seeing brick, you're seeing hardy, which is cement siding. These are built to green standards, either Energy Star or sometimes LEED or National Green Building Standards. So these are designed to be well built. We want them to be a great place for folks to call home. We want their utility costs to be low. And as owners, we want them also to be something that we can maintain long-term, because since we're collecting lower rents in the market, we still have to pay taxes, insurance, our staff, trash, pick up all the other things. So we have to really maintain the operating costs as well. So that's part of the reason we also want to build these as durably as we can. Next slide, please. This is a senior community in Glen Burnie, Glen Forest that was built. Same thing, you see nice amenities. I think we did balconies there. That's a standing seam metal roof. Want to go to the next slide? And then Jessica can talk about this one.
So this is Eagle Park. This is actually it's under construction right now. It's actually the first workforce housing conditional use project in the county. So it has two phases, and you can go to the next slide, Erica. So what you're seeing sort of in the perspective is the senior community, Eagle Park Vistas, and that's it's a four-story elevator building that will be for seniors 55 plus. And Erica, can you go to the next one? And then we have two of these garden apartment buildings, it's 48 total units that will be for families. And there's also a community building, a playground, it's a very large site. But this is also the one that kind of generated my comment about the subdivision requirement. So we had one giant parcel, but because one part of it was age restricted and the other part was family, we ended up having to really create two separate projects, which wasn't our original desire. Erica, I think there's, okay. So that's it. Okay, thank you.
So hopefully that provided an overview with some examples, and we'll open it up for questions from the committee.
I have a question, Derek, in Region One. I heard you say that when it takes a lot of blocks to be in place in order for something like this to happen. And I guess the number one piece is, buy-in from the property owner, or whoever owns the land. My question then is, for example, I know of some property, I want to say approximately 19 acres of land that was purchased for, I want to say about $8 million. I know the owner, and how do we get people like him to say, I want to build housing here, but is it like 20%, 30% that should be affordable housing, or all of it must be affordable housing? Because when you make a decision like that, it's kind of hard for a person that purchased land to develop and make profit if his money's worth out of it. You understand the question I'm asking?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. It depends on what the property owner purchased it at and what, they're willing to sell it for. And it also really depends on how it's zoned. That's gonna affect who is in the market to purchase that property. You guys can speak to this better
It's
than I
on
can.
multi-use, just for edification. It's like multi-use. It used to be R1, but they did the hearings and they were awarded it to, or it was changed, rezoned for M. And it's just been sitting for the past 6 years.
So is that the same as mixed use? Is that?
I think it's right above R10. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so if it's mixed use, it would be eligible for the zoning provision that I mentioned on workforce housing. And so you asked about specific percentages on that. If you're gonna develop home ownership, 40% of the units have to be affordable to households that are earning 100% of area median income. And if you were to develop rental, 60% of the units would have to be affordable. So I think the property owner would have to look at the economics and what they purchased the home, the property for, and what they would sell it for, or how they could develop it.
The only thing I would add is potentially 19 acres is a large site. So in theory, if it made sense, one could look at sort of chopping it up into smaller sub-projects. So maybe if he wanted to do commercial, if found someone that wanted commercial and it made sense to find a site for affordable, maybe there was a site for market rate, you could sort of have a mix of different uses. And because of some of the tools in the toolbox, so to speak, generally affordable housing developers can probably pay, I wouldn't say above market, but we can probably pay higher than a market rate developer would pay because we have the ability to maybe have a higher density. So maybe if we bought 5 of those acres, we could build 100 units, traditional market rate developer wouldn't be able to maybe pay a price. So that could help defray the high cost, because you mentioned an $8 million investment. That's a fair amount of money. But in reality, there's probably a way to maybe take bites of that apple and could do that. And I think the same answer goes to your kind of former question. That is, affordable housing developers have maybe more options than just a traditional market rate. So since we can have access to higher density, generally, if a seller is willing to talk to us, obviously they have to be comfortable with who they're dealing with, and sometimes sellers are worried that they're gonna sell it to affordable housing developers, and the neighbors are gonna say, oh, you're a terrible person for doing that, but in reality, what we're building and what we're providing is quality housing. Most of the product that's being developed that's affordable is not super low income. It's got a whole range of different affordability. I think the project that Jessica referenced and one that Aaron just closed last month, they're serving folks that are disabled making, $2,000 a month, and they're also able to serve people that are making over 100,000. And you've got a whole mix in between with 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. So you could be serving individual, maybe a couple, a medium-sized family, a large family you could have. In a 3-bedroom, you could even have many generations. If you've got a single mom or dad who's raising a child, and they can have their parent. So that's really, we're trying to educate folks that this is really not public housing. It's not Section 8 subsidized housing. It's really bringing affordable housing that's achievable to folks.
The mix of, I like the mix, a mix of uses, and also you could do a mix of tenures on a proper, you could look at doing a small home ownership development as well as rental as well, so. But, and some of the, yes, I agree with you. Section 8 is not bad. But we are talking about a range and mix of affordability, because we want to create affordable housing opportunities for everybody at every income. So it is important to have that mix.
Thanks for clarifying. I didn't say Section 8
No, you didn't
was
say
bad,
that.
but there's a perception that it's bad,
Right.
but you're right.
Right.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Karen Carabani, I would actually like to address that portion of the, briefing documents. I know you guys say that you're not the, Public Housing Administration, and I understand that, so I kind of have a 2-part question. The report acknowledges Anne Arundel County's history of redlining, and the 2040 report calls for the support of low-income households by aligning and implementing programs to address these needs. And I would just like to know where that fits into your plan, because affordable housing does not address that, because most of the population will still not qualify for affordable housing.
So in terms of, how do the policies, I'm sorry, so the question is, how do the policies that are being developed address redlining and the historic discrimination that redlining is? Yeah, so, yeah, that's a great question. I think, the slide I had with kind of some of the solutions, a lot of those were named in the Plan 2040, and I'm really proud that a lot of those have already been adopted. So one would be creating the affordable housing trust. That was one thing that we did, to create a dedicated revenue source that is specifically, creating affordable rental opportunities, but it's also creating affordable homeownership opportunities for a lot of the households with, a lot of our Black families, especially, who have been, out of the homeownership buying opportunity. One thing that we have at our company is the free homeownership counseling that I mentioned. And we market that a lot to underserved communities and historically, communities that have been historically discriminated against. So it's not income-based. You can be part of that program regardless of your income. And I would say about 80% of our participants are non-white households. And, but yet it's still difficult for those households to go out and find a house that's available, even with that $50,000 that we're providing. So there's still gaps there. I would say that the other piece is when you look at inclusionary zoning, it's not targeting people who are at the lowest income. It is targeting moderate income. And the idea is to create small pockets of affordability in different developments throughout the county. And it's not going to solve our affordable housing crisis. That was one of the criticisms that I think some people who opposed the MPDU used to say, well, if you're only creating 10% of the units as affordable, that's just a drop in the bucket. Yes, it is a small drop in the bucket compared to the need, but at the same time, it's getting a lot of those underserved families that wouldn't have an opportunity to buy in the different regions of the county. that don't have affordable housing. So that's one thing we still have to do is the inclusionary zoning. But there are other things such as the school APF, that law was revised. I think you guys said you talked about that already at another meeting. But that's really critical, for affordable housing because, and not just the affordable housing for people at the low end, but at every end. Because it made modifications that allow, in a smarter way, it allows a little bit more development to be, scattered throughout the county and not just in, older communities like Brooklyn Park, where a lot of the affordable housing already exists.
Correct, with us having also some of the most diverse housing already existing in the county.
Mhm.
So my second question is, since you don't, provide that, funding for, from HUD to that, voucher list, and type things, what allows those funds to be released, and how does Anne Arundel County designate those funds? There's over 23,000 people on that list.
Well, so just to clarify, we do administer HUD funds. We just don't administer the public housing funds. That's the Housing Authority, which is a sister agency of ours. So we do, Beth Brush is my planning director. She's on the audience. Her team manages a bunch of grants that go out to nonprofit organizations that specifically provide affordable housing opportunities. And Beth, do you have anything to add to that, like in terms of where, HUD funding goes to support affordable?
For the very low income.
Yeah, I guess the moving home program, do you want to mention that?
Program and our funds that are come through HUD that are targeted to the homeless, typically kind of factor the really low income. We have probably about 200 units, vouchers that we have in the community, working with service providers, providing support as well. It's a drop in the bucket based on the need, but we sort of keep increasing our kind of targeted voucher programs that are outside of the housing commission and housing authority. That really targets those very, very low income homeless folks who are struggling.
So essentially, there is no program for, moderately low income or severely low income, families who are currently existing in residences who are struggling to maintain those residences.
So yes, we administer a pretty large eviction prevention program. We initiated it during COVID, and so that's been funded over the last 3 years with a lot of Treasury money, ERAP money, and also some state of Maryland ERAP money. But thankfully, our county recognizes that renters are still struggling, even though COVID's over and most of that Treasury money is over. We've spent it down. So they did put some ARPA money into a moderated eviction prevention program. So we still have some assistance. And then we're going to be utilizing some of the Housing Trust Fund money to keep that program going.
And just lastly, 1/5 of those cost burden, people are homeowners. How do you plan to support them?
So we have a property rehabilitation program that we provide so that if a house needs repairs, we can go in and help them make those repairs. We actually have a partner agency that I recommend if the house just needs minor repairs. Because if we come in, it's HUD money, so we have to look at housing quality standards and make sure that every single thing is addressed on their list, which is a pretty extensive list. And I mean, I agree with that. You don't want to repair, the kitchen if the roof is falling down. But it's a pretty comprehensive program and it's for low and moderate income homeowners. We also have an accessibility program, creates accessibility modifications. And then we also have a foreclosure prevention program that helps struggling homeowners, provide one-on-one counseling and we help them do mortgage, do a mortgage workout with the lender. We did have some financial assistance that was tied to that, but that has gone away.
So and I'm gonna wrap up all my questions because I have so many. A person who owns a home who may want their mortgage paid, is not necessarily looking to have their roof repaired.
Right.
Or any other repairs for that matter, if they're trying to maintain that cost burden that they're living in. So I'm trying to understand, how, fixing someone's house that possibly for the next buyer, is helping the person who's existing in that cost burden, position at that moment.
Right, yeah, so if you're just having, not just, but if you were having problems affording your mortgage, unfortunately, that money that I mentioned that we had, the financial assistance, we don't have that available anymore. So we don't have financial assistance to help a struggling homeowner, but what we can do is we can help them, possibly contact their lender, can help them with their budgeting, help them sign up for benefits that they might be eligible for, but there's no specific program that just provides that mortgage assistance to those. But on the property rehab, that's more, you're low income and you can't afford specific, a lot of people who are low income, they're living in substandard housing. So the idea is to bring them up.
Thank you.
One thing I'll add, we could verify this, but my understanding is that a voucher that will be issued from the housing authority, in this case, the Housing Commission of Arundel County, I think there's the potential for that to benefit a homeowner, so that is one option. The only other thing I'll also add is, it's not uncommon for affordable housing developers to seek out a small number of those vouchers for our communities, which I think would further help serve the lowest of the income folks that you would inquire about. So I believe the last few communities that closed in Arundel County also may have had, again, not a huge number, but Blue Oaks had maybe 15 vouchers from the Housing Commission and Eden Park. Do they have any?
Yeah, we have vouchers.
Yeah, so I also looked into that. The Housing Commission does provide voucher program. Should you be granted the voucher, I looked for the statistics in Anne Arundel County as to how long someone is on that list. Howard County is 10 to 12 years. Anne Arundel County, I could not find that information, but I do know that it is a lengthy wait process. So these programs don't seem to match up to the immediate need. And so I'm just looking for answers to how Anne Arundel County plans to address that.
Sure, no, you're absolutely right. The existing resources from HUD do not meet the existing need. And that is one reason why I'm thankful for the Housing Trust Fund. And we, in addition to the supply side subsidies that I mentioned by providing the low interest loan dollars to developers, we are doing things like we're continuing the eviction prevention program. We actually have a tenant-based rental assistance program that Beth manages called the Moving Home Program. So that helps renters get into affordable units. We are creating affordable units. We have a small development in Glenbury on some county donated land. So we're developing that as home ownership units, and we're putting a subsidy into it so that home buyers can buy those properties. I think the other thing, one thing that we are looking at is, some kind of a rent subsidy program where we don't give you a voucher, but maybe we help a tenant pay their rent. Cause we know that statistics that I showed with the rents, how much they've risen. Because of that, we've lost a lot of what used to be affordable units. And the other thing that we're looking at is preservation. And so that's going to be huge in the next, I've been working with ACDS for 20 years, and now, some of the projects that had just been developed, I'm looking at them, their affordability period expiring in the next 10 years. So just ensuring that units remain, that all this blood, sweat, and tears that goes into creating these units, we want to make sure they stay affordable for a long time. And a lot of times they need a lot of, they need renovation anyway. So coming up with the money to refinance them and put that money into renovation is difficult. But you're right, what we have, the current amount of resources that we have does not begin to meet the need, but I'm excited because the current county administration has gone, they've bent over backwards to get some of the resources along with the county council to put into affordable housing that we didn't ever have before. Like I said, I've been working here a long time, and and so is Beth. And, for years and years, nobody put any county general funds. And now when this administration came in 6 years ago, oh gosh, 5 years ago, however long it's been, they started putting some general funds, and now we have the housing trust fund, and next, they started looking at these policies that make it easier to develop, multifamily rental. So I'm encouraged by that, but it definitely doesn't meet the full need. And I do think that, some things that will help is increasing the supply. And so that the market just in itself will help if we do things to help increase the supply, but it means that people in these regional planning districts throughout the county need to show up and say, yes, we want to go a little bit higher in the density. We want higher density housing so we can create more units and increase the supply.
Thank you.
Eric from, so the slide that's up here right now, solutions to increase supply. In our briefing package we got said there's 120,000 unit shortage right now in the county.
Like
20,000 shortage.
12,000.
120 in the state of.
120,000.
Oh, in the state of Maryland. Okay, I was gonna say.
State of
okay.
Maryland or the county?
State of Maryland.
State of
I think
Maryland.
all of it is referred to
Okay.
Maryland, yeah.
All right.
Definitely it was a little.
So a couple things in there, it said too, that there's a decline in production. So we can try to do these things here to help increase supply, but what's going on to help the home builders actually increase the production? Is it lack of people that are trained, know how to build? Do we understand any of those underlying root causes in that production decline? Or does it go back to, again, burdens to enter the market, so to speak? Do we know that?
All of those things, I think, the construction industry is really struggling, right? So we have really high interest rates right now, so I think a lot of people are just kind of sitting and not moving. So I think, the next 6 months, maybe we'll start to see the permits pick back up, but that, obviously when the interest rate shot up, you saw things really start to go down. I think, probably even before COVID, we were struggling with trades, right? We don't have skilled trades. Trying to, we're all vying for the same subcontractor because there's only like 3 good subcontractors left who can perform, who have people, I think it's everything, right? It's supply. We haven't been able to get electrical equipment for 3 years in a timely manner. It is a lot of the things that you just described. It's a lot of them. And really what that is about is developers' willingness to take a risk because it is a big risk. Right, and therefore there needs to be a reward on the other side, and so trying to eliminate some of the risk is some of the things that we were talking about in our presentation is can we have some surety in zoning, can we have some surety in the rules that we can get through with an approved project in a timely manner, because all the things that you just said cost us money, right? So hitting the market at the right time is really important.
And would you say lack of land that's appropriately zoned for?
That just
density?
increases your time,
Yeah.
right? It just, if
And
you have to
your
rezone,
land cost.
it just increases the time.
Hi, Dan McGinty. This might be a silly question, but you're talking about capacity and availability of units. I don't see a lot of vertically built structure, right? It seems like 3 stories, that's it. Is there like for zoning, like density restrictions, are these things stopping us? Or is it just like county code that says you can't build up to 3 stories unless you're live, Maryland live?
I think the height is low, but that's, as a developer who builds apartments, I think the height across the code is generally low. And I think that's why you're seeing that. I think there's some overlay areas where the height can be higher. But generally, I think the height is low for multifamily residential.
When you go high there, you do trigger the potential for different codes and different, fire suppression, life safety. Sometimes, depending on our financing, it also triggers higher costs because, once you go maybe over 4 or 5 stories, next thing you know, you're paying into like not a traditional residential construction, but now it triggers maybe commercial. So those things go hand in hand, but generally, anytime I've gone in and proposed something that was even 4 stories, it's kind of raised eyebrows and everyone's like, oh, that's really big. So.
Is the, I work in Annapolis, our former office is turning into this huge mixed-use structure, right? And they seem to be the way of the future, right? grocery store, retail, apartments, till the sky ends, right? And is that something that we can, is that not like in the plan or the design for the northern part of the county? Because I see it elsewhere. I see it in other counties. I think seems like a great opportunity to solve the issue of getting these developers interested into a large scale project. And it maximizes the use of that area with more units.
I think to Andrew's point, it's probably not a great solution to go up is probably not a great solution for affordable housing, but I think the other piece of that would also be examining the county's lot coverage. Is it even in the very dense, zonings, you're talking about maybe 65% lot coverage, right? That's a lot of open space. A lot of parking could go on there, a lot of building could go on there. She could go out with your 3 stories, right? But, so I think that it's really 2 things that is restricting. But for affordable housing going up, to Andrew's point, once we start to hit like that 5th story, we go into different code requirements and even different wage rates.
Gotcha.
Because we're usually using we're usually using Davis-Bacon wage scale, so then we're also paying higher wage, we're paying a commercial wage.
Makes sense.
So,
Corey Fenway, taking his point, community was small, so I see the use allowed here, a lot of tiny homes, like I see in Texas, they've done tiny home communities, and they're more affordable, and American families are getting smaller versus larger, so it seems like we can do more with less, I don't know if that's something.
Yeah, I think that's something to look into. I don't know, do you know the zoning, what's the zoning?
Did they
Barrier
speak to
that-
this recently? Tiny homes,
I think it kind of goes along with the ADU
Mhm.
yeah,
mindset of like, what's the minimum square footage you can allow in a unit. And I know a lot of other jurisdictions are allowing, 300 square feet of
Mhm.
places like when you build.
Or they're not.
Or they're not,
Yeah,
they're
Right,
reasonable
that's
about
what-
that.
Mhm.
But
Right, so you can do an ADU here, but you can't do a development
By
of
itself.
300 ADUs, yeah,
You do a
so
flat.
so I think if that's something that, this community is interested in, that's something you should, advocate for as part of this process.
Sandy Hartzell. I work with a homeless organization here in the North County. And I would like to commend the county for over the last 5 to 6 years of making housing available and more accessible to our homeless. Today, I just got an email from the association saying that 5 of our homeless clients have been put in permanent housing.
Oh, good.
The wait used to be multi years, and it's down to maybe a year and a half, which from 6 to 8 is an incredible drop.
Yeah.
We have a program called Winter Relief,
Mhm.
and we used to house up to 120 homeless. Right now, we're averaging 40 because probably 50 or 60. And I know the numbers don't add up to 120 because some have passed on, some have left the area and this type of thing, have found housing.
Good.
So kudos to whatever has opened up on that end with vouchers or whatever to
Beth.
get some of the housing.
Yeah, kudos to
for-
Beth.
For the homeless.
And we have lots of partners in the county, but Beth's program, the moving home program I mentioned, that's great. What organization do you work with?
Arundel House of Hope.
Oh, yeah, great. Oh, yeah, I remember you now, Sandy. Good to see you. Yeah,
I have a question to Jim Lucas. Could you talk for a minute about, the courses or classes you offer for training and the money that's available for down payment on homes? How many people do you have applying at? Is there a wait list? How does that system work, and who does somebody contact if they're interested in it?
sure. It's a home buyer education process and I feel like it's a strong program and it's pretty unique in that we have a big group intro class, which is provided virtually for people's convenience. That was one of the benefits of COVID. I think that we all learned how to go virtual and we found it was a lot more accessible for people who are working and have kids and that sort of thing. So those are virtual, although we have set up in-person ones from time to time. So you come in, you have a intro class, and then you get assigned, you make sure it's for you and that you want to do it. And then we assign you to a housing financial advisor, counselor, and then they will work with you one-on-one to look over your budget and your credit. And they help you work out any credit issues. A lot of our first-time home buyers, and especially on the lower income, scale, have a lot of credit issues. So we'll help you work those out and solve your credit issues and budget. And then once you do that and you're kind of more home buying ready, you come through, we have 3 different workshops that we provide on the home buying process. And it's free. There's information on our website. I don't know if it's on that.
Got it on the last
Oh,
slide.
good.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's on the
On
left.
the slide? I didn't-
It's on, yeah, when we do our next steps, I've got everybody's contact information and websites.
Yeah, but I would suggest there's an application there. Have yourself or whoever you're sharing the information about, fill out an application and send it to, and then that person will get called for the next group. We kind of do it on a monthly basis. And it may take a couple months to get into it. We have about 400 active clients every year.
Karen Carabani again. I'm going back to, the choice voucher program. I just have a question. How do you advocate for those HUD funds? And, is there a way that, citizens can also advocate, for those funds?
So there are a lot of national organizations that are really advocating for, it's appropriated by Congress, and there is definitely a need for more housing voucher subsidies. And like the Low Income Housing Coalition is one of the organizations. They always send out alerts about how to, advocate for that. That's the one that comes to top of my mind.
So that's not requested by the county? It's not something the county
Correct,
requests?
yeah,
It's just allotted to the county on just like, hey, you guys get this?
yeah, it's allotted on there are different formulas that, yeah, they look at population and how many in our population are low and moderate income. And, the housing authority needs to be in good standing and do a good job, which we have an excellent housing authority here in the county. But yes, it's a federal, advocate to our Congress people are pretty, you're preaching to the choir, but there are other ways, advocacy tools if you look at that organization.
Thank you.
Another, the governor recently announced a program for state lower interest loans and things like that. Is that working? Has that started yet? It was just recently announced.
Oh,
Maryland DHCD has had a program where they would offer mortgages to homeowners at a reduced rate. I remember at one point they tried to package that where you could roll maybe some of your student debt into it and try and help consolidate that.
mhm.
But there has been programs like that in the past.
And they have different iterations of it, so it might have been kind of a marketing campaign to get that out. But we work with that program, we're a local administrator that works, so usually, if you are gonna access their loan program, you have to get first-time homebuyer counseling. So we are a certified homebuyer counselor, so you could use your certificate from our agency to then go and get that mortgage. But it's basically a first mortgage program that is lower interest rates. Mhm.
So I saw Sean had his hand up. We'll take one more question for now, and then we have another presentation. We can take some more questions after that, time permitting.
Thanks, Sean Ames. So I know they can become expensive when they're elaborate, but they don't have to be elaborate. Kind of piggybacking on your question about tiny housing, has anyone approached the county about developing a community, and how would that be handled through zoning of retrofitted containers? Which I know I've seen them, I've seen them very elaborate and become like $400,000 homes, but one or two
Yeah.
units together collectively, they're available, it's sustainable, it's the way of the future with sustainability. Has anyone approached the county about such developments?
I haven't heard anything. I don't know if our development division, another division within the office planning and zoning, whether they've heard anything. I do wonder about building codes, if they
Yeah.
could meet those. But certainly if it's been done before, then maybe could be replicated. Have you all heard anything about shipping containers?
I mean, I've been contacted just by different, businesses that are maybe not, I can't remember if there was one that was shipping containers, but definitely by, the prefab and manufactured housing, businesses. And we did look into it. We looked into it as a way to serve our homeless population, people experiencing homelessness. And really the cost was not that much
Right.
better than stick built. And so, yeah, I think,
Especially that's to be small.
Yeah.
Scale,
yeah.
Too large.
But what about,
Seems it's the same.
Mhm.
what about the, I think I've seen it in Texas, the 3D housing. And it's like
3D, oh, yeah.
concrete, it just spits it out, so.
Yeah, I haven't had a presentation on that yet. No one's contacted me about that, but I'm glad you mentioned Texas, because just one quick thing. Like, the other thought too, this has come up in other presentations we did. There's a group that we've met with that was working in Texas, and they worked with the school system there, and the school system gave them surplus property, and then they developed housing, so they got free land and developed, you know, lower cost housing on it because they were able to get that subsidy. So that's one thing, you know, we've reached out to our partners at planning and zoning. They're gonna be providing some mapping of county surplus land. And that could be an option that we're looking at, as well as looking at faith-based groups and some of the land that they have. A lot of churches have parsonages that are unused, and, you know, maybe we create transitional housing for people experiencing homelessness, or they may have land and we create, you know, affordable rental or homeownership properties. But I like the creative thinking.
I don't believe I've seen many vacant, schools or anything like that.
Mhm.
But I know, in Baltimore, gosh, this is a long time ago, I was in my twenties, I believe, but they converted a school into a apartment. It's, north of Bloomingdale, I think they call it Tiffany Square, is, what it was renamed, but, this was a huge school
Mhm.
that they turned into apartments. And
Yeah.
it's still there today, and like I said, that was almost 30 years ago, for my dating
Mhm.
myself.
We have that too in Annapolis at the Wiley H. Bates Heritage Complex.
And I think someone spoke last time, about the, down, what's that, by the food market in Potomac. When you go down that road, it's a whole bunch of, vacant, like industrial buildings. He said it was 2 months ago. I can't remember what it was, but I know it was down there around the Tavistock area.
Oh, the opposite direction. Sorry.
So in the interest of time, let's move on to our next presentation presenter, Spencer Shanholz. He's a planner in the Office of Planning and Zoning. And he'll share a little bit more on missing middle. I'm not sure if you all have heard the term missing middle recently as one of the strategies to address housing. But I'll hand it off to him to explain that a little bit further.
Yeah, hi. Like Mark said, I'm in the Office of Planning and Zoning. I work in this long-range planning, along with Sam and Erica and, Mark as well. Do a lot of stuff behind the scenes. I help prepare a lot of the briefing papers for you all. I do a lot of our data, our research, things along that line. So I help support all the region plans and county-wide projects that we have. But I wanted to talk a little bit about missing middle, as like Mark said, is kind of another tool, to kind of help support, housing in the county. Missing middle's really become kind of a buzzword in the past, like probably 10 years or so. And it's come up a lot from our SACs and from the public. And then a lot of other jurisdictions in the country are kind of trying to tackle how to make this happen again. But really missing middle, is just, describing housing in terms of scale. So, due to market demand and a lot of the zoning restrictions, we've really pushed a lot of our housing into these larger complexes. And then also on the other end of the density scale for like single family homes. And then a lot of these housing types that used to be very prevalent, don't exist a lot, especially in new construction you see in this middle. Next slide. You can see a lot of these, in Annapolis downtown, they've done a good job of, kind of allowing and implementing code changes to allow some of this to exist, especially in the Eastport area. You drive around, you can see a lot of, buildings like this. But really, one of the reasons it's been gaining popularity across the country is that its scale can fit into existing neighborhoods, while providing opportunities for a diversity of housing types. Whereas we can create more units, like you were talking about, tiny homes, different types of, different price points, different, unit sizes, all within the same area, but still kind of fit into the existing scale and character. So this slide shows, example of, existing single family neighborhood. And then on the right, how, you can redevelop some of those parcels or just convert some of them into different housing types to provide some more units, and then maybe some extra density along transit, along the main road there, just to provide a diversity of housing types. Slide. So y'all were provided with a visual vocabulary document, I believe, and along with the briefing paper. And that really gets into a lot of these examples and provides some schematics and provided some details. But I did want to talk about a few in particular. One of these are these courtyard buildings, or cottage courtyards. So, they're developed around a shared community in the center. So, kind of a open space in the center. And these cottage courtyards are kind of like maybe what you were talking about with tiny homes, almost like a community of ADUs or accessory dwelling units. So smaller size, single family homes existing on a single lot, with a shared amenities in the center. And then on the left, this could also exist as a building. The community on the right is actually managed by ACDS. It's down in Galesville in South County. And it's one of the only ones that I've seen in the county that kind of developed like this, and it developed before the regulations before the current regulations as worker housing down there. Next slide. These are some other typical examples of missing middle that you can see. And on the outside, you wouldn't necessarily notice that these were multiple units in a building. They look like regular single family homes, but on the right, it's a stacked duplex on the left. And then on the right, that's actually a fourplex, an entrance with multiple units inside. They could be built like this, or they could be converted into something like this. What else do I want to say? A lot of this was really common in the past in a lot of older communities, but they don't really exist as much anymore. Next slide. And then these can get even bigger. These are kind of some small apartments. They can be called mansion homes. Multiplexes, multiple units on the inside, kind of the same concept. And these can really provide a good in between, transitional space between your single family neighborhood and maybe a higher density apartment, just kind of give a spectrum and maybe a buffer. Next slide. We talked about ADUs a little bit. We do have a new legislation in the county last year that did allow standalone ADUs. Previous to that, they were allowed to be inside the home. You're allowed to have another unit inside the home on a single family lot. But we finally, they passed legislation in the past year to allow standalone units. And there are some restrictions to that. They can't be used for short-term rentals. I think they'd be owner occupied, or the lot has to be owner owned. And there's some size requirements on that as well. So overall, I'm sorry.
Is there a number requirement of how many foot?
You only have one.
Only one.
Yep, only one. Yep. And there are other jurisdictions that do a lot more than one. But it's a good stepping stone to allow one here. So just kind of overall, missing middle can increase the diversity of housing, but it's not necessarily affordable. But it provides another option, that provides different price points for different levels. And it can, fit a good need there. They can provide lower maintenance costs, responsibilities for homeowners being smaller size as well, which is an additional help. Another key point is the supply is likely to be modest if, some of the code requirements are loosened and, these are allowed, or we provide additional density zones for these to allow. The supply for this type of housing doesn't explode. Other jurisdictions that have implemented some missing middle changes to their code, they're not seeing like huge growth. And that's kind of a lot of the fear around a lot of these code changes is that, oh my goodness, now all of our single family homes are going to be developed into duplexes, and we're going to have a huge But, you know, it's a modest, growth, providing a little bit here and there, so to provide some, market relief. You know, and then the last thing, I've talked about this a lot, is most of these housing types are difficult to be built in, you know, our lower level, residential zones. So, you know, R2, R5, even R10, you know, it's up and above, you know, they could be put in these denser, and they can be built in, you know, these higher, density districts. But, you know, marketably, a developer is gonna build something much more dense than that. So I think it's really about allowing, you know, putting some code changes in that can allow some of these at those lower, R2, or R2, R5, R10 levels. And some of the things that other communities are doing, you know, they're removing density requirements, or really explicitly allowing duplexes or triplexes, or some of these types in those lower zones, defining them in the code. You know, really modifying parking regulations, for them, because that's a big barrier. You know, reducing those, especially in areas near transit. And then the last thing is our lot dimensions, which was kind of talked about, you know, allowing those to adjust to allow, you know, these to exist more freely. And something a lot of other jurisdictions are doing that we've seen, especially, out west, is they, you know, communities develop pattern books. So they, you know, you know, the county develops these, you know, schematics for these building types to developers, saying, here's a example, this could easily pass through our code, here's a, you know, in an easy way. So that's, you know, that's something at a countywide level that could be done, but.
So I'm just curious, right, as we can stop for a moment and take some questions, but based on that, any initial thoughts about mixing up, different densities or housing types within single family neighborhoods? We'll get into this a little bit more when we roll out the maps. I know it's a little difficult too to also conceptualize, but in our next, for the next hour, we'll roll out some maps and we'll talk about where maybe it would be appropriate to upzone, or where we see stable neighborhoods where maybe missing middle wouldn't be appropriate. And we'll talk about that geographically. But in the meantime, we'll take a couple questions if you all have any.
So just in regards, Karen Caravani, to what you were asking, I would just see it as an issue to existing neighborhoods that preserve the single family home feel. So I don't know how that would be implemented in unused neighborhoods or to develop new neighborhoods, just to understand where they would be going with that. Because I can't imagine, you know, you have a backyard and then someone puts in a 4-level and now they're looking into your swimming pool. So I'm just trying to understand, you know, how that would be implemented in a dense area that's already existing. Yeah, that.
Yeah. I mean, I can piggyback on that, you know, where I live in Jennifer Shields, and where I live, there's really not many spaces. There was just one spot and I saw that they were digging a ditch. I ran by it with my dog all the time. I thought, oh, they're building a swimming pool there. No, they were building a house in this tiny little lot. And actually, they're building 2 houses. 2 houses in like a lot. I mean, the houses are like the skinniest houses you've ever seen. And they built 2 houses in those tiny, so they're squeezing them in like these tiny little lots. I guess it would have been a good spot for a duplex as opposed to, but too late now. But I guess it seems to me that, you know, the fact that they squeeze them in this tiny little lot, it's just very developed. Like, I don't know where you're gonna fit these new spots, these new buildings into region 1. Maybe something that.
Sure.
is already very.
I take a different approach. Like, I think this already happens here. I think in Brooklyn Park, like, you have these big old homes that are kind of big structures here. And I always see like 8 or 9 cars parked in the parking lot. So I'm sure that they have, it looks the same as a normal house, but just instead of having a 3,000 square foot home, you take it and divide it into 900 square feet, right? So you might have like, I don't see it as like building a big, apartment building next to a single family home. I see this taking a single family home that's 3,000 square feet and maybe subdividing that house into 3 or 2 different apartments. But at the end of the day, we need more housing. If we don't get more housing, then you're gonna have more homeless people and everything else, so.
And something like that might be then more affordable, right? Is
Exactly.
rather than buying a 3,000 square foot house, now you're,
Yeah.
And think back, there was a fire in London of an apartment. And it burned down to the ground and no one ever put anything back there. I drove past it on the way here tonight and it's absolutely an empty lot.
Mhm.
But the apartment building there was about, oh my goodness. It was pretty large. It was four stories, but it had a lot of apartments. You didn't see a ton of cars, but,
Mhm.
and I mean, but we're here sitting there talking about, you know, homes and housing and affordable housing, and this fire was almost 8 years ago.
You know, and speaking of parking and vehicles, and Spencer, you touched on it too, is the idea would be too, is as you're increasing the density of some of these areas, then maybe you're also then supporting public transportation, right? You're creating that critical mass of ridership in certain areas where then people may not feel the need to own 2 cars or even a car if public transportation is reliable. So next month, transportation we'll be talking about. So you're seeing how all this is woven together and we're sort of building on everything here too, right? So with that, I'm gonna move on to the next slide, tie us up here. And sort of summarize some of these items. We'll take a break, and then when we come back, I'll provide some instructions on our group exercise. Like I said, we'll break ourselves into 2 groups, and we'll roll out some maps and talk about some things. But I think what you hopefully have picked up here is there is no silver bullet. There's no one solution that's going to solve issues. We've looked at several of these different sort of key categories, and we've addressed them countywide in Plan 2040. As you remember, that's our countywide master plan. So within Plan 2040, we talk about different code reforms. So again, thinking back to an earlier slide where I talked about Article 17 and 18. And so maybe there need to be tweaks to the guidelines of how you can build on your property, as well as what you can build on your property to make it a little bit easier or help facilitate more affordable housing. Looking at the development review process, we've talked in the past, we being the county as well as previous stakeholder groups. Karen was on the Plan 2040 Citizen Advisory Committee about the development review process and how to maybe streamline that and reduce the cost for affordable housing projects. And maybe they get put to the top of the review pile so that there is that quicker time frame, and if there are opportunities to make it more to create more certainty in the process. Again, Jessica, I think you touched on risk and how to reduce risk in this process as well. Looking at financial incentives, I think our panelists had talked about different strategies there, whether it's a reduction in certain fees or any other type of incentive, financial incentives to, again, facilitate housing. And then on the buyer and renter side, how we can strengthen those programs and provide some more incentives or financial support for individuals looking to get into housing. So again, I did print off from the briefing paper, the last few pages were those goals, policies, and strategies from Plan 2040. We'll have those at the table so that you can see how we've addressed those countywide. And that's, you know, we don't necessarily want to get into that discussion when we roll out the maps, because again, you know, any discussion on that would probably apply countywide, right? As if we're talking about, oh, you know, if there's that opportunity to reform this specific point of the county code, we'd probably want to apply that countywide and not just to Region 1. So again, take a look at those goals, policies, and strategies regarding housing. Again, we'll come back to it. We may be looking for your support. We don't want to reiterate those in the plan itself, but we can at least just say or make a mention in the plan saying Region 1 SAC does support the Plan 2040 goals, policies, and strategies regarding housing. And that'll also set the context for our mapping exercise here in a few minutes. So before we wrap up this first section of the meeting, any last questions before we take a 5 to 10 minute break to reorganize the room a little bit? No. Okay, so take 5 or 10. The planning staff will reorganize things. We'll separate you all based on geography, get everything set up, and then give you some more instructions about what we're doing. Okay. 7:10. Thank you, Karen. Yeah. Okay, so for this next part of the meeting, like I said, is we're in 2 groups. We've got a group that's focused more on the west side of I-97 and the Pumphrey neighborhood. And then another group that's more focused on the east side of 97, including Brooklyn Park, the Curtis Bay area, and Orchard Beach. And so what we're going to be doing here is we've got 2 maps in front of us. One is an existing zoning map with labels on it over an aerial so that you can see what that underlying development is. And then we also have another map with subdivision activity, areas noted, as well as some other overlays that influence, again, what you can, where there might be incentives for development or some additional flexibility, like the commercial revitalization district that we talked about last month. So with this, like I said, is what we like to talk about is opportunities where we can maybe integrate additional housing types or densities and where those locations would be. Okay, so we've got some sticky notes if you'd like to use that. Or we've got some pens that you can draw and mark up the maps with as well, maybe circling some areas saying, hey, this might be a good area for missing middle, where it's a neighborhood that might be able to transition. Or you could even say, hey, this is a neighborhood that is well established. We know that maybe that community wouldn't be receptive to missing middle or any other type of upzoning. We've also got, like I said, is the Plan 2040 goals, policies, strategies as they relate to housing. And what we'd like to do is, that can always set the context of, for example, the first one is housing types. And the first goal is provide a variety of housing types and designs to allow residents housing choices, et cetera. And so, use that as the context, say, hey, we as the east side of Region 1 agree with that. And here's where we're looking to identify those areas to provide additional housing types. Okay, and you can go through some of these goals, policies, and strategies. Okay, and then at the end, we'll reconvene like we typically do, share out some ideas, talk about that a little bit more. Then we'll roll into our public comment and wrap up with next steps. So like I said, it's because now we're breaking out for those tuning in at home. We will pause the Zoom broadcast, and then we will reconvene as a full group and restart that broadcast at 8 o'clock. Okay. So again, the West Side group, we had a great conversation about where we might be able to accommodate housing, where we might not be able to accommodate housing. I'm assuming the East Side did as well. So West Side, who wants to go first in reporting out our entire discussion?
Sure. Do we do like the map or?
Yeah, do you want me to, I can help hold it up. I'll hold it up.
Oh,
Yeah, we're doing great.
okay, so we are definitely rather constrained here on the west side. We have that big honking gray thing called the airport. Plus some very established neighborhoods. But some of the things we discussed, starting from, I guess, Hanover, we thought this area might be good, but there's some airplane concerns, so probably not. Maybe redeveloping some office buildings, but that's tentative based on the airplane tracks and where the noise is gonna be focused. And also in addition, area around, the old movie theater, that closed
Like a month ago. Yeah.
in Linthicum, and also the area right around, Andover. That is, if you've ever driven past it, it looks like a farm town. And suddenly you're driving past it. But our discussion basically agreed that, the area closest to Nursery Road would probably be the best for that. That there might be opportunities for development and housing, in that area, given that it's got proximity to some nice restaurants and other, Starbucks and other things around it. Another opportunity area that we discussed, was the Maritime Academy, which we have a representative from Maritime Academy. And, they do have some property that maybe we could possibly get availability from, but there's definitely some concerns about traffic along Hammond's Ferry. If we were to develop housing there, that, there'd be a lot of cars entering Hammond's Ferry. So there's definitely, some challenges in that. Other areas, Ferndale, would be an area that we could consider, developing to kind of increase, around the light rail station, to kind of, leverage that transit, housing. Yeah, I can actually see things. Also, there's some areas that, are identified as open space that, might be more antiquated definition, that might be opportunities as well, with this, in this area, that we could, fit some housing in as well. And another thought is, how can we accommodate airline workers? And I think bunk houses was something we discussed, but that's, tentative. Perhaps maybe some of that office space, that's sitting empty over in Hanover, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's possible. I know there's some that's empty space sitting over in Hanover. It's not being used. And I think that's about what we have. As you can see, we have to be very creative on the west side. Constraints.
Okay,
All right.
thanks, sir.
Oh, dang.
Want to hold it? Do I need to finish it up?
No, we can interject.
Oh, yeah, we need for both teams up there. Oh, my God.
We have about half the amount of Post-its. So this, it's tough because this doesn't show the zoning, but we have some struggles here as well, right? You have the Army facility, right? We talked about that a little bit. It's gonna be hard. You'd have to be super competitive to get that, revamp it, revitalize it, remediate it, and then get it to become affordable housing. It's got a rail yard in it. It's close to deep waters. Not a great site, right? We also have a power plant. I mean, I know you have the airport, but we have like a thing that used to make electricity. But we found that is it's a large space, right? And there's kind of sky's the limit opportunity. I think our issue as a group, we kept trying to solve all the issues, traffic and schooling, and what about this? This is based on the dream that everything has aligned. The county has done the studies, the schooling is gonna be great. And a large space like this, sky's the limit. I mean, when you look at the type of housing, multiplex, quadplex, apartment communities, single families, you could do a little bit of everything. You accommodate moderate, high income, low income, middle income, sometimes maybe even no income, right, in this area. The northern part of the county, Brooklyn Park, is kind of interesting. Mary Lee, it's R1, so there's a lot of housing, but it's not high density. So there's not a lot of things you can do. Currently, if you have a 3,000 square foot house right here off of Church Street and you want to turn it into multi-family housing, you can't because the code doesn't allow it. So one of the things we suggested was code flexibility, right? Allow people to capitalize on the space they have. And right now, people are doing it legally, right? You go through, you see apartments, you have multiple families living in one house. It isn't regulated by the county. It isn't allowed by code. This kind of gives people a track to do it legally. The county can track it. It brings more money into the county, more support services, more income, and, you know, better roads, more school funding, all of that good stuff. A lot of commercial up in here. There's a lot of unused, struggling commercial facilities here. Strip malls that have vacancies, they don't have high attraction rates, maybe less commercial, right? We can change some of these strip malls. There's a ton of them going down Ritchie Highway in Brooklyn Park and make those into housing. That might solve some of the issue. And then, Karen, what did you write here?
It's just retail revitalization.
Okay, and then revitalizing the retail that we have. Did I miss anything? Our conversation took
Yeah.
a windy road that covered a
We were
lot of
definitely
things.
trying to accommodate for, very different views. And retaining what is existing while accommodating what could be.
Great. So again, this being just a good exercise to get our feet wet, talking about housing and where it might make sense and where it might not. Again, we know Region 1 is very much built out. But again, there are some assets like big employment centers, transportation networks to take advantage of. And so is there an opportunity to leverage those for more housing? So more on this to come when we actually get to talking, rolling out the zoning maps and actually identifying and making those actual decisions about where zoning may need to change, and again, where it may not. Okay, so again, just an introduction to this. So with that, Karen, if you want to take public comment, and then we can do next step.
Yes, we do have, time for public comment. Is there anyone who would like to comment? Is it 2 minutes? You have 4.
Thank you. My name is Brad Stevens. I'm in Rita, District 1. Couple things is, first discussion, I'd like to know when the public, if there will be a public drop-in session or prior comments that we've done in the past. Because I'd like to see what the final markups on this are. And the other thing is, I think it's great that, I heard in past sessions that there's right now a glut of commercial office buildings that commercial folks would like to know what they could do with. And also heard about doing the tier type of living accommodation. Where on the basement, you've got parking, then you've got, you know, food type of things under at the bottom level, and then you've got maybe condos or pumps from there on out. So, and these can be potentially in current developed spaces that get revitalized for housing. It's just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there any additional comments?
So again, for folks online, if you do want to raise your hand, we can patch you into the broadcast to ask a question. Okay, we did have one individual, Linda. And Linda, you should be able to ask her question now.
Great. I had to leave for another meeting, and I just hopped back on. Thank you so much for this, this discussion. I was so glad to hear that zoning for affordable housing is being included. And that's my main comment, is that we have to include zoning for affordable housing in Region 1. Just want to put a plug in for that again. And thank you all for your presentations and this discussion. And I believe that affordable housing has to include all income levels, and to really make it affordable, and cover the very low income and then the people who are struggling as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, anybody else online who would like to speak? We did receive one other question through the Q&A function. It's specific to their individual property, and I'm just asking them to email the Office of Planning and Zoning so that we can then follow up with them on the side and address their question.
And additionally, to both, people listening online and in, person, if you have additional comments, you can send them to region1@aacounty.org.
Okay, so I don't see any other action then from the attendee list, so we can move on to next steps. Erica, if you don't mind putting up that slide, and Sam will review then our upcoming schedule.
All right, so now time for next steps. Like we did for the natural environment strategies, OPZ will return to the office and we will develop these recommended draft strategies for housing as well as the economy based upon discussions you guys had tonight, as well as our meeting we had back in December. We'll be producing another questionnaire that we hope you guys will get the word out to distribute to your community so we can get as much feedback as we can on those draft strategies. We anticipate that questionnaire to be published around the beginning of February. We provide material that you guys can distribute to let your guys' respective communities know that that is available. We'll be also hosting another community drop-in session. That'll be February 6th at the Brooklyn Park Library. OPZ will be made available for community members to come in and discuss the strategy as well as anything else related to housing as well as the economy for Region 1. For the next meeting is February 21st. We're having at the Maryland Aviation Administration. The topic will be transportation. So we hope to see you guys all there. Something that came up recently with this wonderful weather we've been having, there's concerns about snow and people being unable to make the meeting, and if there's how we communicate transportation as well as cancellation or any kind of postponement. The Office of Planning and Zoning will monitor the weather as it becomes available. We'll try to get a notice out 24 hours in advance. We need to not postpone the meeting, but move the meeting from in person to online via Zoom. We will post information to the hub site. We will email you guys. We will post the contact of how to attend the meeting. But like I said, we'll be monitoring the weather and give notice hopefully 24 hours in advance of any rescheduling.
And we'll be working with Karen and Eric, your chair and vice chair, to make those decisions as well. One other point too, looking ahead to our March meeting, a couple of the other regions, or the two other regions, regions 3 and 9, who are essentially working on the same schedule as we are looking to add in an additional meeting, postpone the topic in March or talk about that as well as an additional topic. And so the topic in March is land use and the land use and zoning. And the idea there would be, again, really give you more of an in-depth sort of a boot camp of some of the maps that you actually see up here, the planned land use map, explain what that is, the development policy area map, as well as zoning, and get into that. I don't anticipate that taking necessarily the 2 hours, and I don't think or 3 hours, and I don't think you want to sit through a 3-hour meeting about zoning, planned land use, development policy areas. So one thought is that we'd like to run past you is this evening you heard from the affordable housing development community. And one thought is to bring in then the market rate folks as well as presentation from the commercial or retail development side of this, just so you can hear then the realities of what I very briefly introduced to you of what the steps are, and they can tell you again what goes into that market research, what goes into making a property viable for redevelopment. And then once you reach those steps, actually working through the development review stage through the county and identifying what those challenges and opportunities are. Sort of give you that full picture of the variety of development that happens, why it happens, why it looks the way it does. So if you all are okay with that, we can reach out to some representatives and bring them in to give those types of presentations in addition to the zoning and land use crash course. So I'm seeing a lot of nodding of heads. I'll take that as consensus,
I
right?
think it's a great idea, because we are reaching one to hear from that side.
Okay, great. So we'll plan on that in March as well. Just again, looking a couple months in advance. Okay. Okay, so, thanks, Sam, for the next steps. We've got the speaker information if you want to reach out to those individuals, if you have some follow-up questions. Again, for folks online, we do post these presentations then, after the meeting, so look for it in, either tomorrow or on Friday. And I think with that, Karen, I'll ask for, if you want to close out the meeting.
Sure do. Looking for a motion to adjourn. Second?
Or is there a motion
Yeah,
first?
yeah, that's what I thought.
motion, I
Yeah,
Okay.
motion. I did it right that time.
So,
So there's a motion.
for a motion
second.
and a second by Jim.
All in favor, say aye. Anyone opposed? See y'all next month.
Okay.